and gentlemen, welcome to the studio this evening. And as you can see, I am going to paint a Coke can. I believe last week I painted a Pepsi can. I had a lot of fun with that. I thought, to be fair, I should probably paint a Coke can this week. Just let me finish cleaning my palette there for a second. There is my reference photo. And let me get a few particulars out of the way with this painting. The color that I'm using for the red here on my palette is primarily Pyrrol Red. This is an M gram paint. I believe the Pepsi can used a lot of phthalo blue on that. I plan on using just as much of this Pyrrol Red on the Coke can as I did phthalo blue on the Pepsi can. The paper that I am using is Strathmore Windmill paper. It's a 140-pound paper made completely from recycled materials. It is wood pulp paper, not cotton. And there you go with that. The brush that I have in my hand right now is the Art Secret quill mop brush. I believe this is a size number 2. I should say the paper that I'm using is 9 by 12 in size, and I cut that down from a larger sheet of paper. And I'm just putting on a base coat of this red right now. When all things are said and done, this color red is going to be the lightest color on this can, save for the white, of course. And then we're going to be darkening this up with several different layers of paint, most of which are just going to be this Pyrrol Red. We're going to keep going with that, keep going with that. But there will be a couple of other colors I'm going to mix in here later on to really get some darks going and try not to put my palm in the wet paint here. And yes, I do turn my page quite a lot in order to get what I think is the best angle to try and do the painting. Sometimes it works. Usually it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But that's why I'm turning this so much. Let's see, what else can I talk about here? I don't know why I started doing these crushed cans. I just thought it was kind of a fun thing to do, kind of pop arty, but not quite the same as everything else. I didn't want to paint just a boring old can, so I thought this crushed can would be a good idea, and it kind of works. And anyway, like I said, they're a lot of fun to paint. There we go. Got just about the entire first layer of red on there, right around that classic lettering. There we go. Just a little bit more on there. And sometimes I do start to lay my brush down a little bit. It's pretty horizontal right now. The more vertical I can get it, usually the better off I am with my control of the brush. All right, so mixing a little turquoise and a little Paynes Grey here. Those are the two colors when I mix those that I like to use for metal. So I'm going to put some color on here of that. Of course, this is the top, and I'm going to leave just that front bit of the can there for just a moment. I'm going to come back and do the rest of that in a little bit, but I want there to be a hard edge between those two, so I'm just going to let that dry up right there. And I'm going to go back and put in the rest of the top. So hopefully I'll have that little tide line in there, and then later on I'll come back and paint the tab at the top. I want the tab to be a lot lighter than everything else. So now I'm just talking to myself, trying to figure out exactly where I want to darken this up at, and talking myself into how I want to do it. So my first attempt here is just to use a little bit of extra Pyrrol Red to see what a second coat of this paint will look like. Let's see if it'll get dark enough, as dark as I want it to be, and as it's going to turn out, it's not quite as dark as I thought it would be. But we're gonna get to that more in a little bit. And then there's this little bit of highlight right around that the rim where the angle of the can changes. I want to get, and now I want to get as far away from the wet paint as I can. So I'm going to come down to the bottom with a little bit of extra and just drop in some color here and there, something like that, and then blend that edge out. I'll let it run out a little bit. So I said that this was windmill paper from Strathmore, and that means that these paints are going to continue to bleed and bleed and bleed as they do with a lot of wood pulp papers. I'm going to have to stay on top of that, or it's going to basically bleed into the wet area, just kind of until it dries up. There's really not a whole lot of stopping it. So maybe I should have done this on my B paper that I use quite a lot, but I've done it on here, and I've done quite a bit of painting on this Strathmore paper before, and as long as you stay on top of whatever it is you're doing, you're going to be okay with it. It's just you have to realize there's a little bit of extra work that you have to put into it. All right, so now I've got color on one side of that stripe. I'm going to put color on the other side of that stripe. There it is. And try to match up color with the bit I did first. Something like that. And as you can see now, this is a really interesting, at least to me, when I put on that Pyrrol Red, and if you look at the color of the Pyrrol Red in my palette, it is red, red, red. It really looks like a Coke can. But as it dried, it really lost a lot of its luster and dulled down quite a bit. So I'm going to be curious to see how much we lose in the second layer of paint. And if you look at the first bit that I painted to start with, you can already see it's starting to lose some of its red. It's fading again. So I'm going to have a choice to make. Do I put a third coat of Pyrrol Red on? Is that going to help me out? Or do I try something else? And we'll see how that goes. I'm trying to use my reference photo just for a general reference. I'm not trying to do a photorealistic rendering of anything, but I want to see in general where I've got some, basically where I've got the low lights instead of the highlights, so that I can continue to add paint into those areas. And I'm just going to continue to add paint into those areas where I think there's a bit of low light, and go with that and see how it's going to go until I've got the entire can done with 2 layers of paint, or pretty close to 2 full layers of paint anyways. All right, I've got a dark on one side of that stripe. I need to put a dark on the other side of that stripe. Put it on, blend it out, something like that, and all of a sudden now it does kind of look like a dark at the top of that can. It looks similar to that. It's not the same, of course, but it's similar. And here we go, a lighter color, a lighter bit of that same metal color to use on that tab. There we go. And put a little bit of shading on, as long as I'm using this metallic color, a little bit of shading on the bottom of the can underneath here. Make it a little bit darker in a couple of places. And there we go. All right. And then I can darken up the top, the very top of the can, not the lip, not the rim, but the back of the can. There it is. And we're just going to keep going with what we see. Now, underneath here where it really has got that big crush, that big line in it, I need to really darken that up. So I'm going to put in, of course, this Pyrrol Red, and we're going to see how it plays out and if we need to darken this up. But you can see how the can is starting to take shape, how it's starting to look like it's supposed to, or not like it's supposed to, like the reference photo. We're going to get there eventually. And there we go. Just softening that edge a little bit along where I think there's a highlight there. And then on the other side of that Coca-Cola stripe, it's dark over there too. Just put some color on that side. And we are on our way. There's a little fold here. I need to get underneath that. And talking to myself saying, maybe I should fill in these letters now. But also that the color really has faded and melted into, well, not melted into the background, but gotten a lot lighter. I know it's going to get, let's say 50% lighter. But I'm thinking, do I want to continue and put on another layer of this Pyrrol Red, or do I want to try and do something? I've got a bit wide of a gap right there. That's what I'm talking about. And I need to tighten that up. I've got some darker areas up here. Really need to darken that up. Really need to darken up underneath here. And so how do I do that? Well, what I'm going to do is do a really quick little practice and see if one layer or two layers or three layers is going to make that big of a difference here. And while that's drying, I'm going to put a little bit of neutral tint. That neutral tint happened to have a bit too much sepia in it. I guess I had used sepia and neutral before. And I'm going to darken up a few of the whites on here. These whites are quite dark back there, so I can go ahead and just put on quite a heavy amount of this neutral tint back underneath there. These letters are in heavy shadow back there. So I don't want to totally make them dark, but I want them to darken up a little bit. I had a little bit of my red run into those letters. I could have left it there. Maybe it's a bit of reflected light. I could have stayed there, but I chose to mop it up just a little bit. And so you can see how just that little bit of neutral tint adds a bit of dimension to this can. And I've got a few more places to do this. And all the while I'm doing this, that color, kind of that color swatch, I guess, that I just made is drying. It's just on an old piece of paper. And I'm going to come back to that and see what it looks like if I put 2 layers or 3 layers of paint on it. These letters back here didn't get quite dark enough. I can darken those a bit more. That's much better. Much better. And a little bit over here. The rest of it is pretty much in the light. Doesn't need really any color on it. All right, so here we can see my initial bit has dried already. I'm going to paint across everything a little bit to see what it looks like. And let me go, while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to come back and add some dimension to this tab. Just a little bit there. I'm not doing anything other than just adding a dark to it, and all of a sudden, when I do that now, it, instead of being flat, it's got some dimension to it. Okay, this is dry enough. If I add a third layer of this Pyrrol Red, what happens? And if I add a different color, and this different color happens to be Maroon Perylene and just a bit of Alizrin Crimson, does that make it a more shadowy color? And I think the answer is yes. I'm going to switch to the Maroon Perylene Get that Pyrrol Red out of there. Maroon Perylene, little Alizrin Crimson. Put that on, and that's going to be my shadow color. Hopefully it's not too different than the Pyrrol Red that's on there. But I think what you're going to see is it actually turns out to be okay. Makes a nice shadowy color on there. There's a first little bit, and I'm going to put some over here. I should have mixed up quite a bit more of this. That's okay. I can mix it as I go. There's no magic formula to it. It's just a little bit of each and get the color kind of close to being right. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, here we go. Now I did leave that little bit on there. I drew that line just underneath the lip of that can. I want to leave that there. I don't want to take it away because there is just a little bit of shadow underneath that lip, and I want to leave that there. And you can see I'm continuing to go back and touch up those areas that I have done before. The more paint I get on, the harder it is to blend these out because I run the risk of lifting the colors from underneath. So that's just one of the things you have to take into account when you're using a wood pulp paper, is that you may have to do a little bit of extra work. All right, and this is the big area here. That's kind of in shadow, so I'm just going to drop the color on there straight away. And already you can see that it gives a fuller image to this. You really can see now the difference between those areas that are in a shadow and those areas that are in light. It's a bigger, stronger contrast. And that's what I want to show here. So I'm going to do this in. And now I had this area that was a little wide for me. I'm just going to kind of fill in a little bit there with that Maroon Perylene. And as you can see, now that highlight is much narrower, and I'm going to continue that on along that crease and just filling in with some colors. Very dark back there in the background, so I'm going to fill that in with that dark color. I think in the end, that's the bit of the can that I like least, that little triangle there on the back side that I just had done. And I think if I were to do this one again, I wouldn't fill that in quite so dark. But I think it's going to be okay. If I hadn't mentioned it, I don't think anybody else would mention it either. But here we go. We can put some really dark back in here, way deep in the crease. And the more I do, the more color I put back there, the darker I make it. The more it's going to make the front of the can stand out. And so I think I can't do that enough. All right, and the last thing I really need to worry about is I have that little sliver right there that has a little bit of color on it, but not too much. I'm just going to very lightly put some color on that. I don't want that quite as bright as it was, but I don't want it to be super dark. Now we're about done. Maybe a few details here and there, like up in the corner. I'm going to take this moment to tell you I've got my own website, watercolorswithmichael.com, that you can visit. Down below you can see my Twitter and Instagram. There are links to those. I do have some shirts on Teespring. If you visit the website, don't forget about the beer fund or the coffee fund. That's it. That's my Coke can. Thank you all so much for joining me. I had a great time with you. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.